Imagine the resplendent Rome of 82 BC. Imperial eagles soared high above, whilst in the forum, senators, vested with immense power, decided the fates of entire nations. The eternal city presented itself in all its glory, dazzling marble, unfading renown, and indomitable might. Yet, in the shadowy back alleys of the Aventine, a place of stifling poverty and despair, a dramatic story was unfolding, one poised to overturn established notions of power, social standing, and retribution. A 10-year-old boy became the victim of a brutal transaction. He was sold into sexual slavery to settle his father's debts. His fate seemed sealed: exploitation, humiliation, and utter oblivion. That boy was Marcus Lucius Calpus. And despite unbearable trials, despite the oppressive atmosphere of Roman corruption and inhumanity, he managed to ascend to the pinnacle of power in the Roman Republic. Not as a broken victim, nor as a powerless slave, but as a dictator, an outstanding reformer, a symbol of a new, transformed era for Rome. Inevitably, the question arises: how did a boy who had known the depths of degradation manage to become a man who altered the course of the Roman Republic's history? Lucius's life journey is not merely a captivating tale of ancient Rome. It is an immortal saga of how suffering forges the spirit, and how, even in the deepest darkness, a dazzling light of hope can emerge. The sun-drenched city appeared as an unshakable monument of grandeur. Temples of gleaming marble reflected the celestial light like mirrors, whilst invincible legions, like steel tentacles, extended Roman dominion across the Mediterranean. The Senate, proudly enthroned at the center of power, proclaimed its unwavering role as the Republic's defender. Behind this dazzling facade, however, lay an unsightly reality, full of shadows and gloom. The Republic was torn apart by internal strife and incessant infighting. The civil wars, pitting the irreconcilable adversaries Marius and Sulla against each other, left gaping wounds, shattered families, rivers of blood spilled from proscriptions, and thousands of citizens dead in the city streets. Corruption, like a venomous serpent, slithered into every corner of society, poisoning it with its deadly venom. Senators unashamedly bought voters' voices, magistrates plundered entire provinces like avaricious vultures, and generals used their soldiers as soulless chess pieces to fulfill their exorbitant ambitions. In the city's wretched quarters, the situation was even more dismal. The Aventine Hill, where dilapidated mud brick houses huddled together and streets remained unpaved, had become a breeding ground for poverty, seeping into every home and poisoning the lives of its inhabitants. It was here, amidst the deafening cries of street vendors and the nauseating stench of open sewers, that Marcus Lucius Calpus was born in 92 BC. His father, Gaius Calpus, was a crippled veteran of the Gallic campaigns, a man who had given Rome his youth and health, only to receive a meager existence in return, barely enough to feed his family. His mother, Livia, worked tirelessly, sewing garments for wealthy patrician families, dreaming that her son would one day escape the grip of poverty and achieve a better fate. In the very heart of Rome's slums, where hardship was a constant companion, fate ignited a fire in Lucius's soul. This boy stood out among his peers. His Gallic heritage manifested in unusual green eyes and ash-blonde hair, making him distinct from the typical dark-haired children of Rome. By the age of 7, he had mastered literacy, observing the education of wealthy families' offspring when he accompanied his mother on dress deliveries. Nature had generously endowed him with talent, a keen intellect, and a beauty that seemed a gift from the gods. Soon, however, this very beauty became the first curse in his destiny. The fateful turning point in Lucius's life occurred on a cold morning in 82 BC. His father, Gaius, was consumed by a ruinous passion for gambling, which ultimately led the family to ruin. One ill-fated night, he plunged into debt with Marcus Crassus, one of Rome's wealthiest and most ruthless men. This magnate was not known for his leniency. In his cruel world, debts demanded repayment in blood, land, or life itself. When the debt collectors burst into the humble dwelling on the Aventine Hill, they were not looking for jingling coins. Their target was something far more valuable. Amidst heart-wrenching screams and pleas, Gaius, broken and helpless, was forced to surrender the only thing he had left, his 10-year-old son. The boy with green eyes and ash-blonde hair became the collateral for the debt. Collateral that, as was clear to all, would never be redeemed. The memory of that day was seared into Lucius's mind, leaving an indelible mark. His mother, Livia, in despair, clutched him close, tears streaming down her cheeks as she futilely tried to shield her son from the debt collector's grasping hands. "I'll return, mother," Lucius whispered, displaying a maturity beyond his years. It was their last encounter for 10 long years. On that fateful day, an innocent child left the comfort of his home to plunge into the grim depths of Rome. He did not yet suspect that a gilded cage of marble and luxury awaited him, where human dignity was valued less than a mere sip of wine. It was here that his personal hell began. Marcus Crassus's home on the Palatine Hill was a veritable palace. Columns of Carrara marble adorned the corridors, walls were painted with frescoes depicting heroic deeds, and the gardens exuded the scent of damask roses. For any Roman, this place was a symbol of power and wealth. For Lucius, however, this ostentatious beauty was merely a prison, cunningly disguised in gold. He was placed under the charge of Quintus. Lucius endured unimaginable suffering, but in this hellish abyss, one thing saved him: his mind. Each time his body was subjected to torment, he recalled his father's stories of heroes like Cato and Scipio. He told himself that dignity could endure even in the darkest dungeon. It was there, in the cellars of Crassus's house, that the young slave began to forge the spirit of a future leader. In the very heart of this nightmare, young Lucius discovered a truth that completely changed his perception of the world. He realized that true power lay not in brute force or chains, but in the possession of information. This boy, barely 12 years old, began to grasp this wisdom by observing his tormentors. During Crassus's endless banquets, where he was treated as an inanimate object, he listened intently to the conversations of the powerful. Humbly bowing his head, he feigned subservience, but his perceptive green eyes missed not a single word. He quickly understood that Romans, intoxicated by wine and their own arrogance, carelessly confided their most intimate secrets to each other, believing no one was listening. Lucius possessed a phenomenal memory, enabling him to recall absolutely everything: which senator was plotting against his rival, which consul concealed enormous debts, which patrician hid his lovers or was involved in dubious dealings. Every minute detail was etched into his memory, as if carved in stone. Thus, unnoticed by those around him, the young slave was transforming into the keeper of Rome's most dangerous secrets. However, he did not limit himself to mere observation. Lucius began to meticulously study his captors, analyzing their gestures, identifying weaknesses and fears. He discovered that Crassus feared poverty above all else, Senator Clodius secretly mourned a lost love, and Consul Lucullus would tremble at the mention of certain names. Where other children would have long since despaired, Lucius saw patterns, vulnerabilities, and opportunities to wield an invisible weapon. Slavery left an indelible mark on his life, yet Lucius's inner world was undergoing a profound transformation. Despite the chains binding his body, the young man's mind was gaining freedom. Secretly, he was building his arsenal, one more potent than legionary swords: knowledge. Lucius understood that, at the opportune moment, this would be the key to liberation and retribution. A fateful encounter occurred when he turned 12. At one of Crassus's lavish banquets, a distinguished guest appeared, a young orator whose fame was just beginning to reverberate through the Roman courts. It was Marcus Tullius Cicero. Unlike the others, Cicero shunned the entertainment. He observed the proceedings with restraint, as if repulsed by the surrounding depravity. That evening, Lucius was tasked with pouring wine at the main table. As he refilled Cicero's cup, their eyes met. The orator saw not merely the gaze of a broken slave, but a flicker of untamed intellect hidden beneath a mask of subservience. Intrigued, Cicero quietly summoned him after the festivities concluded. "Can you read, boy?" he asked. Lucius nodded affirmatively. The orator pondered, choosing his words carefully. "There is a library in this house," he finally said. "Visit it when you have the chance. Learn everything you find there. No one can take away what is imprinted in your mind." Cicero's admonition that knowledge is freedom struck the young slave's mind like lightning. From that memorable evening, Crassus's library, previously merely a luxury item, became a cherished sanctuary for Lucius. As soon as dawn broke, whilst the master's house was still asleep, he would stealthily make his way there, eagerly devouring the wisdom contained within the parchment and papyrus scrolls. Plato and Aristotle, Cato, and the corpus of Roman law, chronicles of heroic deeds, he absorbed it all with insatiable curiosity. Cicero, discerning extraordinary potential in the young man, began to visit him secretly. He initiated Lucius into the secrets of rhetoric, jurisprudence, and philosophy, revealing the intricacies of political struggle. Lucius realized that power lay not only in the force of arms, but also in the power of words. An artfully constructed speech could sway more people than an entire legion of soldiers. These secret lessons granted him not only knowledge, but also something no master could take away: hope for freedom. The young slave was transforming into a skilled orator, a far-sighted strategist, and a cunning schemer. And although the chains of slavery still clanked on his hands, in his soul, he already felt like a free man. Lucius turned 14. 2 years of secret lessons with Cicero had transformed him from a subservient child into a young man, with a mind sharpened like steel. His body still bore the marks of slavery, but his spirit had been tempered, becoming that of a strategist. And now he was ready for his first, carefully planned move in this dangerous game. Amidst the maelstrom of events, Lucius had gleaned an undeniable truth. In the heart of Rome, where intrigues were woven and destinies forged, information was an asset surpassing noble metal in value. And he possessed enough intelligence to bring down even the most influential men of the Republic. Fate presented him with an opportunity during a lavish celebration hosted by Crassus. There, Senator Publius Clodius, intoxicated by wine and carelessness, confided to an associate a wicked scheme to eliminate Cato the Younger, the last pillar of morality in a decaying state. Lucius, remaining unnoticed like a shadow, absorbed every word. He understood he could not openly declare what he had heard. Under Roman law, a slave had no voice. However, he could apply the knowledge gained during his years of servitude. Drafting an anonymous letter that meticulously revealed the plot, he passed it to Cicero via a trusted slave, accompanying the message with a clear demand. "I wish to speak, but not as a voiceless slave, but as an individual endowed with dignity." The meeting took place in the temple of Vesta, bathed in daylight, so as not to attract undue attention amidst the bustling crowd. There, with a composure ill-suited to his young age, Lucius recounted everything he knew. Cicero, struck by the precision with which he recounted every detail of the nefarious plot, listened without interruption. Finally, breaking the silence, he asked, "What do you wish to receive in return for this information?" Lucius, without faltering, replied, "Freedom. And something more. I crave their downfall. I want them to pay in full for all the evil they have inflicted upon me." Thus began their unspoken alliance. Cicero realized that this young man sought more than mere release from the bonds of slavery. He was driven by a quest for justice, a thirst for retribution, and possessed sufficient intellect to achieve his desires. This was no ordinary slave, but rather a player in Rome's intricate political arena. On that day, Lucius ceased to be a passive victim of circumstance, transforming into an active participant in the conspiracy. The unmasking of the conspirators targeting Cato became a turning point. The testimonies of those arrested and interrogated confirmed every detail Lucius had confidentially shared with Cicero. Overnight, the young slave ceased to be an unnoticed figure. He became a pivotal figure in a case capable of altering the Republic's destiny. This granted him influence that could not be ignored. Cicero understood it was time to fulfill his promise, yet Lucius's liberation presented a complex challenge. Crassus remained one of Rome's most influential political figures. A direct accusation against him could provoke a fierce political struggle for which they were not yet ready. They needed to act more inventively. Cato discovered a legal loophole. An ancient rule stipulated that a slave had the right to demand freedom if they could prove they had saved the life of a Roman citizen of senatorial rank. Lucius, by revealing the plot against Cato, perfectly met this criterion. The procedure was swift, but observed all formalities. In early March 78 BC, Lucius was brought to the forum under the scrutinizing gaze of curious magistrates and senators. Suffering humiliation, Crassus was forced to concede, realizing that open confrontation with Cato and Cicero could lead to the collapse of his meticulously constructed system of influence. Thus, in the presence of officials, Marcus Lucius Calpus was proclaimed a free man. He was presented with the pileus, a symbolic cap representing freedom. For the first time in many years, he walked the streets of Rome, unbound by chains and unbranded as property. He was no longer a commodity, but a person with a right to his own name. However, Lucius did not stop there. Freedom was merely the starting point. True recognition came a few weeks later, when Cicero called him as a witness in a trial that shook the very foundations of the Senate. It concerned the case against Gaius Verres, one of the era's most corrupt senators. That day, the Roman Forum was packed to capacity. Patricians, plebeians, merchants, slaves, all flocked to see the young man whose name had already spread throughout the city. Some called him Cato's protege, others Crassus's shadow, and still others, with growing respect, simply Lucius. As he ascended the rostrum, a murmur swept through the crowd. Despite his youth, his bearing exuded dignity. He wore a simple, impeccably clean white toga, which Cato had insisted he be provided with. His green eyes simultaneously conveyed calm and determination. And when he began to speak, his voice, clear and confident, cut through the silence like a blade. Before the esteemed Senate, where the destinies of a great power were decided, Lucius spoke not as a suppliant seeking leniency, but as a herald of truth, intent on tearing away the veils of lies and hypocrisy. For 3 hours, the witness unfolded before the assembled a panorama of Verres's misdeeds, a man vested with power and trust. It was not merely about the petty bribes and embezzlement from the state treasury, for which he had already been officially accused. Lucius meticulously, like a chronicler, enumerated facts about his participation in secret orgies held at Crassus's luxurious villas, where depravity and debauchery had become commonplace. He omitted no detail: names, dates, sums, even verbatim quotes from overheard conversations, demonstrating a phenomenal memory that no one could dispute. And then, the moment arrived when the tension reached its peak. Lucius turned his gaze upon himself. Without a trace of self-pity, yet with unshakable conviction, he recounted how his own life had been reduced to a bargaining chip, an object of amusement for jaded Roman patricians at their secret festivities. He vividly painted a picture of how men who, by day, debated virtue and laws within the Senate's walls, by night indulged in base pleasures, corrupting child slaves as if they were disposable wine cups meant for fleeting enjoyment. A deathly silence fell over the chamber. Some senators, recognizing themselves in these denunciatory words, shifted uncomfortably in their seats, whilst others paled as if struck by lightning. The common citizens, who filled the forum, gazed in astonishment at the young man who, having endured such humiliation and suffering, dared to challenge Rome's most powerful individuals, unafraid of their wrath or vengeance. Upon concluding his testimony, Lucius was not met with ovations or shouts of approval. Instead, a suffocating, all-encompassing silence prevailed, as if everyone present realized they had witnessed a turning point in history. Lucius's testimony not only led to the conviction of Verres, who was soon sent into exile, but also ripped the mask off the hypocritical facade of Rome's corrupt elite, exposing it for all to see. From that day forward, Marcus Lucius Calpus was no longer merely a slave boy. In the eyes of the people, he became a symbol of justice, a man who had endured grave trials and found the courage to speak the truth. In the markets, in the alleyways, and even in the baths, people repeated his name, Lucius, the young man who dared to challenge the Senate itself. To the masses, he was a hero; to the patricians, a dangerous force; and to Crassus, a threat he could no longer control. The trial against Verres was merely the starting point. Lucius's voice had become an unseen blade, piercing the heart of the decaying aristocracy. And amongst all the shadows gathering over Rome, one stood out as the most ominous and powerful: Marcus Licinius Crassus, the man who had bought his childhood like a thoroughbred steed, the man who had cast him into the abyss of despair. Now, this young man, whom he had deemed broken and subdued, was dismantling his empire from within, step by step. Marcus Licinius Crassus, known for his unyielding will, initially displayed feigned indifference, naively believing the approaching storm would pass him by. However, Lucius, like an all-consuming flame, rapidly gained strength, fueled by the indignation of the Roman people and Cicero's strategic genius. Every new testimony, every accusation brought forth, and every secret revealed inexorably eroded Crassus's power. His once loyal supporters, gripped by fear of sharing his fate, began to hastily abandon the sinking ship. Then the powerful magnate, accustomed to solving problems with brute force, resorted to a desperate measure. He dispatched hired assassins by night, intending to silence the young freedman forever. But Lucius, tempered by trials, was no longer a defenseless youth. Anticipating such a turn of events, he had already formed a personal guard, comprised of free gladiators and esteemed veterans, loyal to him for his demonstrated courage. The assassination attempt proved a complete failure, with catastrophic consequences for Crassus. The botched attempt to eliminate him transformed Lucius into a true folk hero. Now, in the eyes of the Romans, he was not merely a witness, but a fearless fighter who had dared to defy the wealthiest man in Rome and survived. The city streets echoed with chants of his name. Lucius! Lucius! Ordinary citizens hailed him in the forum. Freedmen saw him as their leader and followed him as their champion, while some patrician families, weary of pervasive corruption, began to offer him clandestine support. What had begun as a personal vendetta was rapidly escalating into a powerful political movement. Rome, exhausted by the avarice of its own elite, saw in this young man a beacon of hope for justice and change. Ultimately, Crassus found himself in the grip of circumstances, facing numerous accusations of corruption and abuse of power. The state began to seize his assets, and those who had once sworn loyalty abandoned him, leaving him utterly isolated. His downfall was as striking as his former eminence. Disgraced and stripped of everything, he was forced to leave Rome and seek refuge in his estates in Asia Minor. There, his life tragically ended several years later in a battle against Parthian forces, leaving his name forever tarnished with dishonor. Meanwhile, Lucius's career soared upwards, like a brilliant comet streaking across the sky. At the tender age of just 17, he was already attracting the attention of various political factions, who saw in him the embodiment of justice and a hope for change. However, the most impressive aspect was not his youth, but his meticulously crafted strategy. Instead of blindly submitting to established political institutions, he resolved to build his own robust support base. He managed to rally freed slaves, ordinary citizens, landless veterans, and even women from influential families who had suffered from the corruption scandals he exposed. This alliance, bringing together such diverse segments of the population, became an unprecedented phenomenon in Roman history. For the first time, the dispossessed and forgotten found a leader who genuinely represented their interests. Bolstered by this powerful support, Lucius took the next step in his political career, putting himself forward for the position of quaestor. For a man freed from slavery, without noble lineage or substantial wealth, such an ascent seemed utterly unattainable. However, Lucius stood out from the crowd of contenders. His speeches, imbued with sincerity and marked by life's trials, resonated both in the humble dwellings of common folk and the opulent halls of the aristocracy. "I have known darkness, so that you may walk towards the light," he declared from the rostrum. And the people listened, seeing the marks of his past on his body, and feeling an undeniable truth in every word he spoke. The elections of 76 BC marked a historic event. Lucius didn't just win. He secured the support of more voters than any other candidate in Roman history up to that point. The unbelievable had become reality. A former slave, who had endured human trafficking and humiliation, had managed to break into the very heart of Republican power. And this was just the beginning of his triumphant journey. Lucius's ascent to the position of quaestor caused a genuine sensation in Rome. Representatives of the senatorial nobility looked down on him, sometimes with open hostility, but they could not ignore the accomplished fact. The people, however, adored him. And this was not blind faith, but love founded on a sense of shared experience. Lucius spoke to the people in a language they understood, shared their suffering, and personified their life's wounds. He was not an arrogant aristocrat dispensing promises of justice from his palace. He was a man who had survived, known poverty, slavery, and cruelty, and now demanded justice for everyone. Contrary to expectations, his tenure as quaestor proved to be a true revelation for society. Marcus Lucius Calpus demonstrated himself to be an independent politician, unswayed by powerful factions. He decisively tackled the eradication of corrupt schemes within the tax system, which significantly replenished the state treasury. Mindful of his own difficult childhood, he established a fund to aid orphans and disadvantaged children, and also initiated the creation of specialized courts to hear cases of child abuse, an unprecedented step for Rome. In every decision, his personal experience and desire to transform his past suffering into protection for those in need were palpable. Ordinary Romans greeted him in the streets, seeing him as their advocate. Landless veterans called him brother. Even some reform-minded patricians began to show an interest in him. The name Marcus Lucius Calpus ceased to be merely that of a fortunate freedman, transforming into a symbol of a new Rome. In 74 BCE, an incredible event occurred. He was elected praetor. Despite all doubts, he managed to secure victory. And once again, his rule was marked by bold reforms. He reorganized the judicial system, aiming to expedite trials and reduce corruption. He directed financial resources to distant provinces that had suffered for years from the abuses of avaricious governors. Furthermore, he proved himself a talented orator. Every speech he delivered in the Senate was filled with the power and conviction of a man who had learned about life not from books, but through his own experience. The culmination of his career was his election as consul in 72 BC. At the age of just 20, he reached the pinnacle of power in the Republic. This was truly a pivotal moment in history. Never before had a man of such humble origins, no one from slavery, reached such heights of power. His triumphant election was not a mere coincidence, but a genuine expression of the people's will. The Roman Republic, weary of power-hungry generals and corrupt senators, yearned to see a leader at the helm who embodied different values and ideals. And Lucius became precisely such an iconic figure. Upon assuming the consulship, he faced the most serious challenge in Rome's history, the Spartacus Rebellion, which transformed thousands of oppressed slaves into a formidable army, defying the might of the empire. Senators, gripped by fear and a thirst for blood, demanded the immediate suppression of the rebellion by force of arms, dispatching renowned generals Pompey or Crassus to quell the uprising. However, Lucius, standing before the Senate, delivered a speech that would forever be etched in the annals of history. "I know the soul of a slave, for I was once one," he declared. "I know their innermost longings, their fears, and their hopes. This rebellion cannot be quelled by the sword alone. It can only be pacified with justice." He proposed a wise and far-sighted strategy that combined firmness towards the most radical leaders of the rebellion with profound structural reforms aimed at improving the condition of slaves and freedmen. Lucius established clear and understandable paths to emancipation, improved their living conditions, and imposed a strict prohibition on the most brutal forms of exploitation and violence. While the clangor of war shook the Roman lands, Lucius, ever vigilant, devised a multi-pronged strategy. He realized that merely quelling the revolt by spilling blood would not bring lasting peace. It was necessary to address the very root cause of public anger to prevent new outbreaks of violence. Therefore, alongside military preparations, he initiated secret negotiations with moderate factions of the rebels, offering them amnesty in exchange for laying down their arms. This unexpected move was intended to divide the ranks of the rebels and deprive them of their most reasonable supporters. The outcome surpassed all expectations. The war, which had seemed endless, concluded far more quickly than anyone could have anticipated, with minimal losses and immense political impact. For the first time in Roman history, instead of simply drowning a rebellion in blood, it had been transformed into an impetus for reform. The people rejoiced, proclaiming Lucius their savior. His name resonated through the streets, eliciting enthusiasm and admiration. Naturally, conservative senators, accustomed to the old order, viewed Lucius with suspicion and unconcealed animosity. They saw him as an upstart who had disrupted their established world. However, they understood that he could no longer be ignored. Lucius was no longer merely a promising politician. He had become the most influential man in Rome, achieving this not through private armies or inherited wealth, but through the power of his intellect, unyielding will, and popular support. The life story of Marcus Lucius Calpus serves as a stark yet timeless reminder. True power is born not from gold or noble birth, but from the ability to transform personal suffering into a noble purpose. A child sold into slavery, humiliated and reduced to an anonymous object, not only survived hell, but managed to forge his scars into a weapon of justice, becoming one of Rome's most distinguished leaders. His triumph is a hymn to the human spirit, capable of overcoming any ordeal and rising above the darkest abysses. Lucius's life path is a reflection that remains pertinent even today, 2 millennia later. This story demonstrates that true greatness is manifested not in avoiding mistakes, but in the ability to rise after falls, even when society condemns. True strength lies not in inherited advantages, but in the indomitable will of those who, having lost everything, do not lose hope. Lucius didn't merely reform Rome. He redefined the very concept of power. He proved that even in the most corruption-riddled environment, the voice of one individual can shake the foundations of statehood. Despite the brevity of his life, his legacy has endured through centuries, affirming that human dignity must be protected and the vulnerable must not be forgotten. For, as Lucius's example teaches, regardless of the bleakness of circumstances at the outset, there is always a chance to transform suffering into something extraordinary.